Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Catherine Sievett, Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture here at the Weitzman School of Design, and very happy to welcome you to the second of our department's Fall 2024 Landscape Lectures entitled Uncharted. I talked a little bit about the charter at our first lecture with nocturnal medicine last week, or 2 weeks ago, but this seems like an appropriate time to address this again. A charter is a written document that establishes the structure of government, often written by a country's legislative or sovereign power. A charter often sets up and defines rights and privileges. The United States Constitution, for example, is a charter of government. This is a true story. Since 2016, I've carried this charter in an inside pocket of my backpack, right there, with some other important things I like to keep with me: Motrin, my hairbrush, and as of the last year and a half, reading glasses. And I usually use all of them every day. It's an important thing to have in your back pocket too. So by uncharting, we might consider and even question foundational authorities and perhaps even power writ large, or creating perhaps new charters, considering our United States on North America is a settler colonial overlay of so many other nations. Many of the themes of charting and uncharting will be explored across this series of talks, and reading and rereading and rewriting our charters is more and more necessary. And with that, as we gather here in Meyerson Plaza Gallery, we acknowledge that this Philadelphia William Penn charted region, when known as Coaquinoc, and this specific place of large shells, and remember that we're on Lenapehoking. This fall's Uncharted lecture series has been curated by our very own Robert Petrusko, who serves as an associate professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture. Bobby's research, practice, and teaching focus on the history and speculative design potential of environmental media. His design work, which is conducted under the name of his studio Warming Office, is part of the permanent collection of the Fondation Cartier in Paris and has been exhibited in more than 15 countries at venues such as the Museum of Modern Art, the Palais de Tokyo, ZKM Center for Art and Media, and the Venice Architectural Biennale, among others. Petrusko embodies transdisciplinarity in the expanded field of landscape practice. So no surprise to see these three talks, which are the series this fall. He's earned a Bachelor of Music in Music Synthesis from the Berklee College of Music, a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from Villanova University, and a Master of Architecture from the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. And tonight, we're delighted to welcome Jeremy Kamal to the school. And let me just say, we all need a little world building this week. So thank you for being here. And let me now invite Bobby to the podium to introduce Jeremy. Thanks, everyone.
That was nice. I don't often hear my bio. That's good. Yeah, thanks for that, Catherine. And also, before we get started, I just want to thank Eric, Ray, and Aaron for all of their hard work behind the scenes organizing the public lecture series this semester. So just jumping right in, you heard it in my bio, the S word, speculation. So I'm going to kind of use that as a framing device for a moment. In her 2014 book, Speculation Now, the anthropologist Vaijayanti Rao describes the relationship between modernity and a speculative ethic. Though the term speculation is associated with extraction, I have a very loud voice, as well as economic forecasting, Rao highlights the adjacent and emerging usage of the term in fields of art, fiction, and importantly for us tonight, design. Indeed, this ethic has been an organizing principle for life under late capitalism, which demands from each of us an approach to uncertainty, to hedge, to edge, to predict, to anticipate. These acts incrementally push us all collectively into the future, taking the present along with us. Speculation, Rao writes, is about reaching for the unknown, sometimes with unpredictable effects, unintended consequences, and requiring an engagement of thought that is tinged with doubt about the future. I did not write this today. Prescient, though. For her, speculation is an unwritten definition of modernity itself. Hopefully obvious and compelling to those of you in the room tonight, speculation also implies an optimism in the face of uncertainty. That as we move into the future, a robust imagination can turn our forecasts into prefigurations. To organize the materials of the present into radically new configurations might lead us into more meaningful relations with our natural world and with each other. It is with this latter meaning of the speculative ethic in mind that we can appreciate the work of tonight's speaker. I'm excited to welcome Jeremy Kamal, an interdisciplinary designer who brings this form of speculation into being within his work. Through film, video games, music, and landscape architecture, Jeremy explores new possibilities for how we think about culture, technology, and ecology. His approach asks us to imagine alternative futures and consider the different ways we might live within them. Jeremy has coined the term digital geomythologies to describe his work. I love that. And these geomythologies challenge us to engage with a future multiple, opening space for new ideas about ecology and culture as they co-inform each other. Jeremy is the recipient of numerous fellowships and awards for his work, including from the Sundance Institute and the Onassis ONX Foundation. And recently, he was awarded an award of distinction from Ars Electronica. It's cool. He holds a Master of Landscape Architecture from Harvard GSD, which is where we met, and an MA from SCI-Arc's Fiction and Entertainment program, where he continues to teach. But as with all great designers, his work overflows disciplinary boundaries. Please join me in welcoming Jeremy Kamal as he presents his lecture, Forbidden Fruit. Thanks for being here, Jeremy.
Okay, solid bios all around. Thank y'all for having me. It's an honor to be here. I've always kind of wondered what it's like over here at Penn, and there's kind of a mythology for it, for me, I guess, around it. So to be giving a lecture here is really an honor. So Bobby and Catherine, thank you so much. Okay, so my name is Jeremy Kamal. I'm an artist, filmmaker, and music producer. I'm exploring themes of ecology, culture, and technology, as was said before. Over the past 5 years, I've been living in a cinematic universe of my own making entitled Mojo. This talk explores 3 environments from that universe and uses them to articulate my practice, process, and philosophy. Um, right off the bat, there's a host of things we could talk about, so don't be shy. I'm pretty much an open book. We could talk about how I made a thing to the philosophical underpinnings of a thing. It really doesn't matter to me. So by all means, don't be shy. Towards the end of 2017, I became obsessed with one question. If 2 Chainz or A$AP Rocky designed a landscape, what would it look like? How would it change the way we interact with and organize space in its components? How would we reimagine technological systems, planting systems, infrastructure, ecology, climate, culture, and the idea of nature itself? This video is my first attempt at trying to answer some of these questions. think there was an update on my computer that just. I'm gonna try to find like where it was before and play from there, maybe. Or can we start it from the top? Do you guys care? All right, let's start it from the top. From elementary to 8th grade, I attended schools located in various underserved regions of PG County, Maryland. One of which you're seeing here. This is Suitland, Maryland, where I went to elementary school. It was the school I went to was known as Shadyside, and it has since been torn down. During recess, we'd run outside and pick a fruit that grew from a tree stretching over the playground fence. We didn't know what it was, we just knew it was really sweet. They looked like blackberries, but they were a little bit longer and came in different colors like white. I forgot about this fruit for a long time until years later in my landscape architecture program at the GSD, when it reappeared on our urban ecology slide. It belonged to the mulberry tree. I remember that sense of nostalgia building up and was immediately thrusted into my past when I saw it. I listened to the lecturer describe the beauty of this plant because of its resilience, its high yield in spite of harsh conditions, and of course, its sweet taste. In the same breath, the head of my program said that if we were to plant this tree in our projects, we'd fail. And I know the sentiment was a joke, but at the same time, it kind of pointed to something. The plant was associated with a community in a region where upkeep was minimal or non-existent. It was home to the projects where I went to school as a kid. It was a symbol of neglect, disarray, pestilence, ruin, chaos, and invasiveness. These weren't the plants discussed in our history courses or listed on our recommended plant list. The prestigious elm trees, the Coosa dogwoods, the hemlocks, ginkgo balboas, you guys know the deal. But that moment and many others like it helped me realize something, that our landscapes are displays of ideas, not natural facts. Contrary to what it may seem like, they aren't maintained through leaf blowers and lawnmowers as much as they are cultural ideas and values. For instance, the American lawn that we see displayed everywhere in the US is really a belief about modern domesticity, the right to property, and the plight of cities. The urban park that emerged in northeastern cities such as Central Park is again a belief about the plight of cities, but also the importance of particular forms of leisure amongst particular classes like the bourgeois. And lastly, the emergence of national parks, which are really beliefs about what nature is and what it isn't, where it begins and where it ends, beliefs about what's worthy of preservation and how nature should look. Mojo is an extended fictional universe that I created as a way of challenging some of these ideas. It's rooted in the fact that landscapes are birthed and sustained by values, that our cultural abstractions generate ecological realities. Through music, animation, video games, virtual painting, photo collages, Mojo depicts modern geomythologies that reinterpret ecology and fundamentally nature. The universe features a growing cast of interconnected landscapes that host atmospheric imagery, emotive characters, and unique narratives. Each environment is a closed-loop system in which contemporary Black rituals are essential to their balance. It's a universe where Black American spatial impact is proportionate to its cultural impact. The universe is a response to my experience in landscape architecture, where we were taught to study, see, and interpret landscape from a particular point of view. It's a response to the quote unquote rule that says your values are forbidden fruit. The unassuming rituals of today have become the ecological forces of tomorrow. Producing music is no longer something done on a laptop, but something occurring in a landscape. In this case, the production of trap music. The studio space has evolved. It's held up by a gantry crane, allowing music producers and sound engineers to observe amplified bass notes sent to the water below. The resulting cymatic patterns are visual maps as for how to mix, master, and arrange music. The ritual entwines with technology and ecology. As each pond displaces water, drones behave like pollinators, dropping fast-growing seeds around areas of overflow, triggering the spontaneous growth of plants around the landscape and transforming it within seconds. Here, the act of making music is directly linked to the act of making habitat. The 808 sample is a generative force. The louder the bass, the denser the shrubs. The more treble, the more spacing between plants. The landscape relies on the producer just as much as the producer relies on the landscape. I need you to produce trap music because my flowers are wilting. All right, testing. Omnipresent ripples animate the water in the surrounding landscape. The floods is giving birth. An array of water cisterns spread out as far as you can see, each having a different pattern of vibration, each pattern visualizing a different sound. A sharp snare snaps, the water in the left cistern spikes. A distorted 808 thumps, the water in the right cistern spreads in a jagged ripple. In the middle, a kick drum causes a swell. As the beat develops, cistern after cistern vibrates a new pattern. High in a tower above the array is a source of sound. The dark studio is only lit by the control board and some soft light filtering the clouds. A small blinking red light on the control board indicates that the track is currently being bounced. Upon completion, the pools of water fall still. The ripples fade into the edges of the cistern, and the clouds darken above. So this is the starting point of that landscape. I was trying to interrogate the landscape fountain. I mean, to be quite honest, there's probably a bunch of starting points for this landscape, but I'm kind of choosing this one as a coherent thread to pull. So the landscape fountain is an object interpreted in many different ways across many different cultures. For example, the centrally placed pools of Islamic gardens reflecting water's importance as a first matter or material prima, the matter that begets all matter. The flat geometric it's the flat geometric and symmetrical French Baroque fountains, which are a reflection of ideas of imposing order on nature, or the Baroque style fountains in Italy depicting Roman mythology. Each culture shapes its fountain according to its own values and beliefs. But I was curious about what would our fountain look like? What would a fountain that was designed by A$AP Rocky or 2 Chainz look like? And how would that value express itself? When I'd ask my friends and family how they would interpret a fountain, it would often look like the image to the left, a framework and an image that we couldn't really detach from. There was no other real frame of reference. But I felt like, wouldn't it look better, or wouldn't it be more fitting if it looked like the image to the right? A fountain expressive of the strong vibrations that rattle your trunk when you listen to A$AP's music. A cymatic image of the 808, so often heard in the music of the culture to which he's a part of. This is the starting point from which I use the value of music, and in particular trap music, to reshape the fountain and subsequently the landscape in which it sits. What emerged is a series of, rough, loose images that I'm putting together to try to bring to life a landscape that has yet to exist. And I'll kind of jump in and out of the formal presentation to just talk about process that I think might be useful. But this is a large part of where I start. I find a mood or a vibe, something that visually stimulates me and that inspires me wanting to pull a thread to make something work, right? How do those headphones and that cymatic pattern, that flora and that kind of atmosphere exist in one space? And then I kind of I rigorously go through like image curation. And I'll show you all, you'll see this board will grow more and more and more throughout the presentation. And I go through that process and I'll unpack that a little bit more, but this is the starting point. And then from there, I tried to generate my own image. This was back in the day when I was doing like landscape paintings in Photoshop before generative AI was a thing. And, even still, I think it's a great useful tool. But the goal here now is to make the leap from found images to images that don't exist and start to compose these images and, take agency of what this world might look like. And it was a very tough threshold to cross. Sound engineers add an aquatic component to their craft as they master the art of visualizing sound through water. From high vantage points, they observe fields of cisterns, examining water's behavior and calibrating sound accordingly. A sharp spike tells them that the sound needs compression. Dull and shallow ripples tell them that sharper frequencies need to be added. And you'll hear me read a little narrative. I vacillate between the process of image curation, image making, and writing. That's always a fluid, like a trifecta that I'm always engaged with as I'm building a story. So it'll get pretty loose from here. So this is one line of inspiration that the landscape takes. So I don't know if there's music producers in the house, but digital audio software, across digital audio software, there's a kind of familiar archetype. There's the playhead that scrubs across a MIDI or audio file. And then, there's an audio track that lays itself out along different tracks. And a lot of the movement of the gantry crane is inspired by that playhead scrolling across an audio track or a MIDI file. But in this case, those files are now these cisterns, but it's almost an exact parallel where each of these cisterns hold a different type of instrument or sound. So what we see in the actual video is just a fraction of the larger landscape. It's based off of a fluidic network. It's a very theoretical, computational idea where any fluid that you could turn on or off could potentially build logic inside of it. So just like a computer has electric circuits that either go on or off, thereby producing zeros and ones, you can potentially have fluid circuits that either have pressure or no pressure, fluid passes or fluid doesn't pass, to create a similar binary logic. And I was very intrigued by the idea of water being computational. So in this case, the cisterns manage themselves and regulate themselves in their levels based off of these fluidic switches. and you kind of see it engraved in the landscape subtly. They're kind of embedded and covered. I think that's pretty much all here. Oh, I use Illustrator. There's a process. I'm using the same tools that I'm learning in, architecture school, but I'm also mixing them in with film-based production. Like I said, please ask away from production to concept. I'm happy to answer those questions. So the landscape, I'm trying to really use music as a motivator for how I think about things like scale, placement, layout. Um, the cistern, to the far left is the 808. So the value of I'm trying to take what's valuable in the genre of trap music and extrapolate that spatially. So the 808 is the most important sound in trap. It's the big, heavy, low end sound that you kind of hear rumbling. Um, and that's kind of what everything feeds off of. When I produce trap, you got to make sure the 808's hitting. If the 808's not slapping, then the whole track is just kind of like whatever. So if I were to produce in this landscape, I would want the 808 to be the biggest cistern. I would want it to be the one I can see the most high resolution and have the most access to. So therefore, in the fluidic network, these large cisterns that you see here, I think it's like two, these two here in the far left are the 808 drum. Um, and then next you have the kick drum, and then you have the snare drum, and I'll go through those individually. But for those not familiar with these sounds, this is the 808, this is the kick, and then this is the snare. So the 808, like I said, is the hero of this kind of landscape. It's the main point. And at the center is a stage where a performer might stand, and around the perimeter is where an audience might stand to have these kind of aquatic Coachellas during the rainy periods. And uh, once again, it's the biggest cistern. I wanted to make it something that's also operating as a social space during different periods, but it's really the hero of the landscape. And then you have the kick drums. So I arranged the kick drums in the way that I kind of mix kick drums in the DAW software. So each kick drum that you see here is or each cistern that you see here is taking a frequency from different kick drums. So what I like to do when I make a kick is take highs from other kick drums, lows from other kick drums, mid from other kick drums, and composite them into a single one that sounds unique. And I said, how would I spatially arrange that? Where I would want to see an array of those different frequencies. And you can see the top center cistern is where all of those composite frequencies combined into one. So I get to see them parsed out, but I get to see that individual one or the composite version up there as well. And then the snare and the hi-hat is spatially arranged how it kind of feels in the mix, where it sits outside of the low end frequencies. A lot of, once again, trap is low end 808. So when you hear that snare, it kind of really cuts through. And so I tried to represent that by making those the ones that stick out of the network. So I know exactly where to find a snare. It's not going to be in the clusters with the kicks, but they're going to be on the outsides of that fluidic network. And the notation seen on the mixing board is once again also inspired by this idea of fluidic computation and the idea that the landscape would feed back into the culture, the way music is read, understood, and interpreted. So the idea that fluidic switches would now represent certain kinds of elements on a mixing board, and not only thinking about it in terms of the technology, but the body itself. One thing that's very common in with the audience I'm trying to address, or the culture that I'm trying to engage, is the idea of tattooing where you're from on you. And this is a cover from Nipsey Hussle's Slauson Boy from Crenshaw, California. And it's something that I felt like was, apropos for the culture and the vibe that I'm trying to make in this world. So I'm going from the level of skin to the surface of a mixing board to the landscape itself, and I'm constantly vacillating between all of these different scales and agents in the landscape. And then of course testing out how would that look in this world, how would it sit on the skin in this world, how would they start to embody and identify with this place. And you can see in the rendered version, it's very subtle, but it's on the hand that's DJing the landscape. And also fashion. I'm looking at new forms of fashion around adaptation to water. How might the landscape be the new, Givenchy, the new, Off-White, the landscape being the purveyor of what, or the kind of dictator of what fashion starts to look like, and the biggest fashion designer there is. The ground is dark, hard, and sharp. An out-of-place carpet of red slowly approaches a carpet of blue. What appears to be a slow growth from far away turns out to be a violent war between red and blue flora. At the fringes, vegetation take each other down at 1,000 times the speed of normal plant movement. Above the battleground, drones soar, releasing seeds in empty zones for reinforcement. The war subsides, the landscape is still again. It resembles nothing like the landscape from before. The desolate and dark is now sublime and vibrant. A new ecology of blue and red are what's left behind.
How the fuck you think this thing was gonna go? Nigga, you know the code. Always trying to go against the grain and shit. For what? What did you get? Now look at you. Reputation stained, name stained, mind stained. I want to see how you weave your way out of this one.
A tea master sits in full lotus position, contemplating a new ingredient for his tea. Behind him is a lush red forest full of options, yet his attention points towards an empty blue horizon. He questions the environment frequently, both in love with it, yet skeptical of it. He remembers a blue herb from his past and is brought back to his childhood memory. His natural affinity for the color blue has always been at odds with the environment and the community to which he belongs. Many eyes watch him, waiting for him to break the rules, waiting to set him straight, ensuring that he keep up with the status quo, ensuring that he maintain the illusion. Haunted by the memory, Haunted by his memory, he explores his desire to taste the herb once again. but some questions you should not ask, and some fruit you should not eat. A new paradigm transforms gang culture. Instead of violence and spray cans, colored flora in the form of moss, tea herbs, trees, weeds, and ferns are used to mark and claim territory. Using fast-growing GMO plants, they engage in ecological warfare in order to mark their respective turf. Seeker drones search for any sign of blue amidst red plant clusters. Spreader drones take to the fringes of turf boundary to drop seeds for reinforcement. Where in cities gangs were perceived as mere menaces and vandals, here they become forces of nature. With every battle sprouts a new habitat and ecological community. So I told you the board would get bigger, and it's a lot bigger than this still. This is a software that I use called PureRef. It's often used by 3D modelers and people in the film industry so that they have a reference as they're kind of building a model or looking at a VFX animation. So one thing, there's a quote by an artist, artist and filmmaker named Arthur Jafa that I kind of use as a starting point for my process and explaining kind of what's happening here. He says like sometimes an artist might be obsessed with like apples. He might make sculptures of apples and paintings of apples and drawings of apples. But it's not until they put it next to a red wagon or a fire truck that they realize they're actually fascinated with the color red. And so a lot of times I'm using this process of juxtaposing different images and ideas together to get a Venn diagram of what it really is I'm interested in. What is the story here? You know, there's a general superficial interest sometimes. Richard Moss infrared landscapes, super beautiful. I wonder how that would be produced in the context of Black culture and certain, processes that might happen within our culture. And then I make these connections over here. But then the special one, I don't know if you noticed the awkward Boy Scouts in the left corner. So that came about. There's a kid holding up a gang sign there, and that's a shot from the film Made in America, Bloods and Crips. And when the film opens up, one of the founders of gang culture recites without any type of cue or prompt um, the Boy Scout mantra. And I'm like, what the hell does this guy, how does he know the Boy Scout mantra by heart? Like, and he was trying to join the Boy Scouts when he was a kid and got rejected because white parents didn't want their children with Black children. And as a result, he developed his own crews in his neighborhood. And these crews in California would be the beginnings of what would later turn into gangs as a result of a lack of Black leadership during certain periods. And I wanted to get back to that story. The idea that a group that was rejected from this kind of other group that has this expertise in landscape that goes out into the world and learns the landscape, learns how to trace it and track it, that we can reconnect to that in the future, that this lost past can actually be touched once again. A new hierarchy governs gang culture. This order is dictated by landscape expertise and manifests in gang apparel. Large pockets hold gardening utensils and seeds. Bandanas cover the mouth and nose and prevent breathing in pollen. Thick gardening gloves protect the hands while clipping and pruning. A specialized glasses filters out all colors except blue in order to spot enemy vegetation. All right, this one's a long one. We can see if we could do this one. An orange haze covers the landscape. The dense fog smells of burnt prairie grass, sweet spices, and charred meat. Deeper in, we hear the sound of humming machines. A drone whizzes past. It's carrying a large iron plate full of raw food. It moves towards an orange glow up ahead, a searing wildfire. As it flies into the flame, a second one emerges from it. Its food is cooked: marinated ribs, seasoned hot dog links, T-bone steaks, bell peppers, and buttered corn, perfectly barbecued. More and more drones repeat the cycle. One after the other, they enter the flame like pollinating bees. High above the frenzy looms a subwoofer tethered to an inflatable balloon. It beeps several times before emitting a thunderous boom. The flames instantly disappear. The smoke spreads. In the clearing, we see what's left behind. A precisely articulated ellipse of scorched earth. One of many like it dotted throughout the landscape, each one strategically placed in an alien-like array. The subwoofer slowly falls to the scorched ground. It stands erect like an ancient monolith, then levitates micrometers above the ground and glides to its next location. Splayed across the landscape are large parabolic acoustic mirrors, each specified according to a party size, location, and distance from a sound source. Music is the governing force of the landscape. Autonomous mobile drones, 3D print, or autonomous 3D printers use algorithms to print mirrors from sediment and optimize sound across the grassland. In the same way that solar panels all point towards a single solar tower, these parabolic reflectors point towards the DJ. So this landscape is referencing the cookout. It is the new location of the cookout. A lot of my process is saying, how can I take an element in our culture and scale it up? And in this case, I was looking at the cookout as an actual space that we go to, but also a metaphor. Some of you may have heard of the term "you're invited to the cookout," which is not necessarily a literal cookout, but it means that you're cool. It's a term of endearment. It's a term often said towards people outside of the culture that an acknowledgement that you somehow get us. So I wanted to take that space, and I said if I took the cookout, which typically takes place on lawns, and I tried to locate the biggest lawn I can, what would it be? And naturally, the grassland. So this is the landscape I'm using for my first debut gaming project. It revolves around wildfire cycles that act as large-scale grills for cookouts. Autonomous drones carry raw food in prescribed burn areas, and wildfires alike, emerging with barbecued spreads for nearby cookout goers. The same cookout feeds athletes and fitness enthusiasts who use the grassland as a training ground. Wearing remote sensing footwear, these athletes retrieve and send land data to enhance predictive models of where fires will occur and where they need to be. The landscape relies on the cookout, and the cookout relies on the landscape. It's a cycle maintained by the process of consuming and burning calories. It's based on the fact that wildfires are worse the more we try to prevent them. This project looks at a shift of wildfires as a welcome natural phenomena by pairing it with desirable cultural phenomena like the cookout. Yellow hues emulate the dry season of the landscape, sparse in its canopy cover, reflective shading apparatus such as wide brim hats and lightweight hoods provide shelter from the sun. Light clothing provide ventilation in sun-bathed landscapes, while also registering the movement of wind and the topographic markings it makes when blowing across carpets of dry grass. The fashion is entirely inspired by the landscape and the wind that animates it. All three of these landscapes belong to the same world and derive from the same question. What would happen if 2 Chainz or A$AP Rocky designed a landscape? It's my way of showing that there is no dumb question. And for the longest time, I really wanted to know this, but it felt like something inappropriate for the pedagogic that we were kind of consuming at the time. This one thread led me to explore ontological ideas of technology, automation, labor, led me to think critically about ecology, the medium of landscape, and the composition of spaces around us, the political, the cultural, the social agendas interwoven in all of them. What would happen if a landscape relied on trap for its to water its flowers? What would happen if an environment relied on one's loyalty to the color red to maintain its ecosystem? What would happen if wildfire cycles aligned with cookout cycles that fed athletes whose movements allow the landscape to sense itself? What would happen if landscapes were reinterpreted and reimagined through a Black gaze in which our culture was no longer regarded as forbidden fruit? Thank you.
We have some time for questions, so I think Ray has a microphone going around. Don't be shy.
Wow, thank you so much. That was amazing. All of your visuals were insane. I am really into this. I'm really curious about what your evolution was from, like you said, the pedagogy of landscape architecture to creating your own vision. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. The evolution, I don't know. It felt a bit natural. There was a critical moment. So I was trying to play the game and learn slope grading and all that stuff. And eventually, my wife, she ended up doing a thesis and I didn't do a thesis. And when she did a thesis, she was doing like this radically speculative project and I was like, holy crap, I didn't know you could do that. And she asked, like if you were to do a thesis, what would you do? And that's when I asked the question. I was like, I want to know what like a landscape looked like if Two Chains designed it. And I never got to explore that fully there. I think that was the beginning of it though. And I was referencing music videos at the time as an aesthetic because music videos were being shot in these rural landscapes. And so we did like a whole exhibition that was looking at music videos from contemporary Black artists as a reference, a precedent for landscape. And that's when it started to grow from there. And I think once I learned animation as well. When I learned animation, I felt like it was a fuse of two things I really love. I was always into visuals and drawing, and I was always into music. And I think that time-based medium that brought both of those together was something I just ran with. And I think I was always a storyteller. So I think, once I had that critical moment, it actually hurt my brain to ask that question because it was so foreign and it felt so forbidden to ask. I was like, I just had to be radically honest with myself. And it was actually tough to do. Like when somebody asks you, like, if you were unencumbered, what would you do? And to really answer that question honestly and earnestly actually took a lot. But once I did, it just triggered a momentum that felt natural after a while. And I just kind of fed into it and I kept going with it. So after graduating, I knew I wanted to get more into narrative. I wanted to deal with music more. So I got into motion graphics and then I found myself at the fiction entertainment program where it was trying to tailor those skills more directly towards storytelling. And then the rest is kind of history.
Thank you for your talk. I had a question about, I think about the, I guess, the time vector that you decide, there's a vector through space that kind of, you seem to, in the first couple of videos, decide that time is moving through a certain dimension and then you're kind of passing different instruments within the mix. And so there's kind of an experience that's designed in a single um, vector. But in the game, it seems like you might be able to move in multiple vectors. So the two aspects of the question are something about reverb and whether there should be reverb in the space or whether that's here in the space is here too. Um, and then also maybe spatially, whether there's a single dimension for time that is in the transposition to the space.
So you might need to, I'm rusty with, you might need to ask the question again or simplify for me, please. Sorry about that.
Sorry,
Jet lag.
I'll
jet
ask
lag.
just one part of the question. your time is you showed the timeline in the sound program that was from left to right,
Hmm.
and then when we go to the image, you're moving through space. It seems like um, hovering over a single path of these dots that represent beats.
Hmm.
And so the space seems to be designed with a single idea of a single passageway going in a straight line.
Hmm.
But the game, I'm imagining you can move around freely.
Hmm.
So how do you? So is there still an analogy between a single
Yes,
vector in
yes, yes.
time and space there?
Yeah, I'm with you. So, yeah, I guess it would depend on the landscape because the game that or what I'm gonna, landscape that the game will express is very different from that landscape. So that landscape was designed to move that way, but in the game, this one is gonna be, it's going to be a linear story. It's going to be a linear game. It's not going to be necessarily like an open world game. There'll be some level of movement bidirectionally, quote unquote, but you'll be able to move in all directions in the game. But there will be a limitation of how I'm kind of curating an experience. In this landscape itself, I'm still resolving, so it might be too premature to talk in detail about what that game will look like. But I imagine there will be a certain level of flexibility. But for those familiar with games, there's open world games and there's linear games, and it's going to lean more towards the linear game. Um, so in that way, it might resemble the first landscape in terms of that, the way that the character moves and progresses across levels. But yeah, there's still going to be a lot more autonomy and agency with how you move and where you move. But a lot of that is also up to design, which hasn't been fleshed out fully yet. So this is actually great to see. So we'll see what happens later in the future, if what this game looks like. But you all got to see like me try to articulate where it is now, and this is how I start. So you're getting a real time entry into how I start projects, the mood boards, broad scale ideas, and then allowing the process of designing a game to help also articulate the space is going to be an interesting kind of play. But right now, I'm working on the narrative context for the game, so it's not just like a, so it still retains those emotional qualities that I like in film.
Hi, thank you again for this amazing talk. Going back to the water cisterns, and I understand, music can very visually show itself through water reflection. Imagining this alternate space through two chains, and why was your choice like it's so resemblant of a water treatment plant?
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just want you to kind of expand more on that as like why this was a landscape you chose to reflect their perspective versus another that could have water in it somewhere else that could show music.
Yeah, I don't really have too much of a response. I knew, like, I had these small images of cymatics, and I'm just thinking of like how to make things bigger and like what infrastructures support that. But I'm also thinking about like these infrastructures that can operate as they do. Like it can still filter water, but could music be played on it? Can it also become an instrument? And part of me really feels like that's important. And I guess the reason is that it feels like a lot of cultural proclivities are at odds with other systems because they're often thought of in these bubbles. There's human culture and then there's the rest of things. And I felt like the direct injection of these things that we'll do anyway without anybody asking, they're almost in a sense automated in that sense. Like you don't have to tell me to make music. I'm just going to make music. So what if that you could appropriate that proclivity towards something in a system? So I did want to look at, I guess you maybe use something infrastructural to directly say maybe infrastructure should consider music production as a mode of operating itself, but also engaging the system around it. Because at the moment, for instance, music production is, you could argue, is most likely at odds with the landscapes around us. They require lithium batteries. The industry of music production and the industry of music itself uses a lot of lithium batteries. So there's this disconnect, right, with what's happening ecologically, but what's happening culturally. We want more music we're pushing more resources and capital into music, yet there's this other landscape that's being affected by it. So it was like, what if we looped music back into the landscape in some way? And what if infrastructure supported that? And so I guess using a cistern, the familiarity of it, like, oh yeah, that's a cistern, water cistern, that's a treatment plant, but music is being played there and it's engineered to support that, I think was maybe a statement I was making. But also this was done in like 2018, so who knows?
Thank you for the presentation. So I'm very interested about the game part. I'm a huge gamer myself, and also I've done some small game project myself. So I'm curious if you have any idea to bring that game project to the next level, like make a like a playable one, interactable one, or do you want to just keep it remain at the conceptual level?
Yeah, no, yeah, like available on Steam, like I want to make a game, like a proper game, and I felt like I've always wanted to make a game. When I was start thinking of this project early on, I viewed my work more as cinematics towards a game that doesn't exist yet versus just cinematics. I felt like the ability to occupy the landscape and in some way embody something that is in it was more appealing to me than just sitting and watching it in 2D. So pulling towards more immersion. Also through installation, I'm trying to think of installation projects that are more immersive, but I also want the medium of the already embedded immersive qualities of game to be a new medium for the project. Um, and also, yeah, how you move around the space in different dimensions and here, because uh, one of the philosophies of the 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 world is that all the infrastructure is actually instruments. They actually double as instruments. So when you move around, like being able to hear things and experience that without me making a track and then pressing like sequencing shots to a track, I think is a whole nother level of agency and experience of the world I'm trying to create. So it will be a playable game to answer your question. Ideally, it will be available on Steam at some point, and everybody could play it.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited to see this work and so excited about kind of how deep you are in so many worlds. And also, I mean, you're a world builder. So, I mean, you're doing fashion, music, and ecology, and obviously, like, see these really deep and beautiful connections. And I'm curious, like, within, I don't know, disciplinary worlds or just like life communities, like, where you feel like people are really resonating with the questions that you're asking deeply. Like, where are those people? I know some people in the world building program at SCI-Arc, it's awesome, and I've been kind of curious about that, but curious, like, yeah, where you feel like people are asking similar questions.
Yeah, I don't know like exactly where people are asking similar questions. I know there's a definitely big interest in landscape architecture programs and architecture programs, um, which is nice. And I think whenever I could be seen or recognized by certain art festivals, like I think it really sparks. I do a lecture every year, not necessarily festivals, but art venues, art-based venues. um, I do a lecture every year at the UCLA School of Arts, and they're like really into this, which is cool because I really felt like maybe this is, and it's also a critique on the work. Like I don't want it to just be for architecture nerds. I want this to be something that extends towards the communities I'm trying to engage, and I've done talks with those communities on the level, but still feel like there's a barrier. Um, it would be like Black artists, Black creatives, Black tech artists, digital artists, but there's still a level of relatability that I feel like is being lost. It's dense, and I want the work itself to be. I don't care to necessarily give a lecture people or lecture my audience that I'm targeting. I just want the experience of the work to be that connection that's made. I could do lectures here and keep it here, and that's fine. If my audience wants to hear the lecture, great. And I'm always tailoring the lecture to get closer to that because I have to move between two worlds. Like this world is very different from the world I'm talking about. So I almost feel like at some point I just have to make two different lectures to kind of really target the message, and hit the message that I want to hit. But yeah, so it varies, but I think landscape architects and architects is probably the highest percentage, and then from there, like different artist groups and Black artist groups. Yeah.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you. Oh, sorry. Maybe I should stand up. Hi. I just wanted to say thank you. Your work is amazing, and it was great to see how you're able to represent different elements of culture, specifically with music. Um, and when it comes to music, there's like this balancing dynamic between like the beat, but also like the lyrics. And I really liked how we were able to see your process. So I was wondering, can we hear a little bit more about the way that you balance both writing and image? I know you talked a little bit about it earlier, how you do both, but what do you start with? How do you go through it? I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, great question. Great question. So I usually start with images. I'm just visually inclined. I've always been. And what images do for me is generate questions, right? If I see two images together, a cymatic pattern next to a Nipsey Hussle album cover next to a foggy landscape, how does this work, right? I'm like, how do we get here? And I keep asking questions through images, and what would generate this atmosphere, or what would generate this effect? What would bring someone like Nipsey Hussle to this landscape? And then I'm looking for answers that are also visual most of the time, and I end up with this big, huge mood board of different things and connections. And then I have to stop that, right? I'll probably keep doing that and just end up with nothing but questions swirling in my head unless I start to write. What writing does for me is it allows me to actively imagine, like, because I don't have the visuals necessarily to tell me everything. So when I start to write, I have to start to linearly sequence events, consequences, cause and effect, actions and reactions, i.e., beats, narrative beats. And that allows me to start to ground those images. So those images are like floating matter in my head with all these awesome potentials, but they'll only be potentials unless I start to ground it through writing for me. And then what the music does now, often I'll have a playlist associated with a project. And it's kind of natural because there's a vibe I'm trying to touch, and the music pushes emotion into it. So I would say like the imagery is like a kit of parts. The writing connects those parts together, and the music gives it a soul, right? And that's kind of like how I work, and I keep on moving between those three. And it's not always that linear, but if I were to, on average, say what the sequence is, that's probably it. It's visuals, because music. The best part is when music. I start with the music. That's when I get the most juice because the music already has emotional qualities in it. And when there's an emotional quality, for some reason, maybe because I'm a human being, there's a lot of like triggers that happen visually and even verbally. But that doesn't happen all the time. So when it doesn't happen, it's usually I'm just putting interesting visuals together, writing to fill in the blanks, and then I'm using music to touch a vibe and to really ground it in a story, I think.
Hi. I was really captivated by your narration over the videos, and I was interested in like your inspiration behind using the word stained as like one of your chapter titles of like your animations.
Yeah, so Stained is because this is about a tea master of this landscape who has a fascination with the color blue, but he belongs to a group in a landscape that's the color red. And it's kind of me trying to envision this dilemma, like what if you just like the color blue? Like, how do you deal with that? But everything is against that. So he's rebellious, and he taps into this memory of his first encounter with a blue herb, which is forbidden. And he actually, as he gets older, mm, teases the idea of using it as a tea ingredient. And as a result, he's blue everywhere because it was a booby-trapped plant. And but he's stained. Everybody recognizes him as stained because he touched the blue plant. And that's why you have stained, and that's the blue marking where he is. This one is a very like abstract teaser. Um, there's way more to come after this, but it's me also just trying to experiment with new tech. So I'm also looking at like metahuman. How would I engage character in the work that I'm doing, but maybe try to pull a narrative thread with it. But I'll probably continue this. I look at this as like a precursor of an inciting incident for a larger story.
Hi, Jeremy. Just wanted to say I've been following your work for the past year, and it's been very inspiring. My question for you is, I know a lot of your, sorry, I know a lot of your work has been inspired by the music that you listen to, which gets translated into landscape. But I was also thinking, have you ever produced or made music inspired by landscape? Like, have you ever like listened to the pulse of a plant and that converted into beats, and somehow you made music with that? Yeah.
Like, have I ever? So I to rephrase. So I make music, and then landscapes are inspired from it. But have I ever made
Music inspired by landscapes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah, probably, but I couldn't like go back to it. But music comes in from all directions for me for sure, and I'm pretty sure. Yeah, my mom is Jamaican, so we go to Jamaica a lot, and there's this one song that plays in my head every time I recall this moment in the landscape. It's this huge valley, and it is this song that triggers in my head. And I think that came from the landscape, for sure, for sure. But yeah, it does. It comes from all different directions. So yeah, goes back and forth, and that's a big part of my motto in general. Like things go back and forth. There's a loop, and they kind of there's a feedback loop with everything, including the way I work. So these landscape ideas are more than just a world building idea. Often they're core to how I see things and feel about things. And I think that's always going to show in the work in some way.
Yes.